Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We got a good one for you, as always. Here on the show today, we are talking a bit about COVID. Live updates as the number of hospitalized young children who tested positive is jumping, and this is a disturbing situation there. We're going to break in and kind of calm down a little bit of some of those headlines, but another very disturbing story about kids recovering from COVID at a higher risk of diabetes. Taking a look at why that is, and because that is also true now for adults. They're also kind of confirming it is true for, I think, 14 and up now as well, according to new research from the CDC. Also, thousands of Americans are being forced back to work with COVID. Alex Press in Jacobin has a story there about what in the world is going on with that, and are these people going to be symptomatic? Are they going to be spreading a new more cases of the virus, keeping more and more variants and things going on forever and ever? Also, 3 men have been sentenced to life in prison with the Ahmad Arbrey killing, and another reminder for all the people who very, very much seem to need it: Dick Cheney should be in jail, because a lot of people, they're forgetting about it these days. It's a little bit disturbing, to say the least. All right. We are going to get on with the show here today, and starting with this very interesting, very disturbing new piece of news. The number of, this again, New York Times here, the number of young children admitted to the hospital who tested positive for the coronavirus rose precipitously last week to the highest level since the beginning of the pandemic, according to data on Friday released by the CDC. So, who test positive for the coronavirus? Children admitted to the hospital who test positive for coronavirus here. Very important to kind of look at these numbers, because what I found out recently, and I kind of had to pinch myself to remember that I heard, it was Anthony Fauci, not some kind of conspiratorial person that I heard saying this, was, sometimes kids will get into the hospital and they're going to come in with, They're gonna come in and test positive for COVID, but they will be really into the hospital for another reason and will not have severe illness or a severe case of COVID at all. But the increase again was observed in children age 4 and younger, which is very disturbing, who are not eligible for the vaccination, and the data included those admitted to hospitals for reasons other than COVID and then tested positive. And I think I would really like to know, again, how many of people who don't have any other problems, 4 and under, who don't have any other problems going to the hospital for COVID and kind of testing positive later. How is that last how much of the pie chart is that last percentage there? The people who were admitted to hospitals for reasons other than COVID and then tested positive later, because especially in hospitals, it's very, very possible that people who end up feeling fine, or don't even realize, asymptomatic, for example, like me. I've been recovering from COVID for, as I mentioned in the last show, for the past few days. I've got just about tomorrow, it'll be 10 days since I originally tested positive, and the whole time I had to get a test for travel reasons. I mean, I would not have gone to get a test otherwise. I would not have thought I was positive. And, other people that I knew who had it, my family, for example, some of them were sick for short periods, but, there was a lot of time and a lot of instances, especially with Omicron, that does not get the lungs nearly as much, where it is, you're just not as symptomatic by any stretch. So the rise may at least partly be explained here again by the overall surge of Omicron cases, which affects all populations, as well as spread of other respiratory infections. And other officials said there was no sign of an increase in severe cases. So I think that's a kind of a pretty important thing, because to break down this, seemingly big hospitalization number, we don't know. It could be because of, other respiratory infections, which I think is also interesting that they put that in there. It doesn't, really make any, as well as it could be explained by the overall surge of Omicron cases, which affects all populations, as well as the spread of other respiratory cases. And we do not know how many people who are in that hospital today, for whatever reason, are in there because they have COVID. Like, what is keeping them in the hospital? Is it because they have COVID and the case is really bad? Or is it because, they have COVID, but they also have another more serious need, whatever that may be, to be in the hospital? Because I think, personally, just me, the only people who should be counted as COVID hospitalizations are the people who are in the hospital for, the most serious reason they're in the hospital is, they need to intubation, or they need to, get some sort of COVID support, like some sort of program some sort of like medical treatment for COVID, not for like leukemia or like a broken bone or something like that, something more serious. I personally don't know what percentage of the numbers is which percentage, but it is interesting and it's disturbing. So it's definitely not something you want to kind of see slip out from under you, just, dismiss, rapid numbers of children in the hospital under any circumstance. So more than 4 in 100,000 children aged 4 years or younger admitted to the hospitals were infected with coronavirus as of January 1st, double the rate reported a month ago, and about 3 times the rate this time last year. By contrast, the rate of hospitalized children aged 5 through 11 was 0.06 per 100,000, roughly the same rate seen over the past few months. So that one is holding steady, and to the point where, it could be, a lot of these people are getting really severe cases of COVID, these young kids. It's because we're seeing that only rise in the group that has not been able to get vaccinated, the 4 and under, yet. Children infected with the variant are still at much less risk of becoming severely ill than adults, and even young children seem less likely to need ventilators than those admitted during previous surges, experts said. So that's another good sign. We have not yet seen a single there's any increased severity in this age demographic, said Rochelle Walensky today at a news briefing. She noted similar worries about the Delta variant have proved to be unfounded. Yet the data do not show a steep rise in coronavirus infections among hospitalized children of other ages. The children aged 5 and older that qualify for vaccinations may account for some of the disparity. Walensky said, however, only 16% of children 5 and 11 are fully vaccinated. Sadly, we're seeing rates of hospitalization increasing for children 0 to 4 who are not currently eligible for COVID. It's critically important. Again, I think the best advice here coming from Walensky, the CDC, that we provide them protection. All right, so cases again going up 610,000 cases, 227% case increase, but deaths now only up from about 1,300, 2% to from about high in the 1,300s to 1,404. Also, Citigroup has prepared to fire unvaccinated employees by the end of January. Probably very few people. Other bigger companies have refused or seem like they will be doing the same. Don't really care about that. Another big news. The Supreme Court, members of the Supreme Court's conservative majority seemed skeptical on Friday that the Biden administration has the legal power to mandate the nation's large employers require to be vaccinated against the coronavirus or to undergo frequent testing. So, again, these large employers, these big vaccine mandates that Biden tried to do, they are now being put before this, conservative Supreme Court, like not just, right-wing in some areas, but, hardcore, actually legitimately, libertarian conservative court here. A federal workplace safety law, they indicated during the 2-hour argument, did not provide legal authority for the sweeping emergency measure. The court seemed more likely to sustain a separate requirement that healthcare workers at facilities that receive federal money be vaccinated. That regulation, the subject of a second argument, was in keeping with other kinds of federal oversight and supported by virtually the entire medical establishment, some justices noted. The argument concerning more large employers was more lopsided here, as Chief Justice, because remember now, in order for kind of the liberals to get a majority, they will need not only just Roberts to flip, in the previous 5-4 court, now in a 6-3 court with Amy Coney Barrett, they're going to need someone like Gorsuch or Kavanaugh or Alito or Amy Coney Barrett to flip. But we'll pull up another one of those hardcore committed conservative justices to flip to get the majority vote, and that is most likely not going to happen. Chief Justice John Roberts and Neil Gorsuch said the states and Congress, rather than federal agency, were better situated to address the pandemic in the nation's workplaces. And Amy Coney Barrett said the challenge regulation appeared to reach too broadly in covering all large employers. And Gorsuch and Kavanaugh suggested the governing statute had not authorized the agency to impose the mandate clearly enough, given the political and economic stakes. Yes. So that is, and obviously the liberal people took the liberal side there. That looks like, it's going to turn out pretty bad. Well, not a big surprise there. And it's just kind of really a consequence of having the Supreme Court that you are going to have. Another interesting story, we saw Rochelle Walensky, the director of the CDC, on Friday defending the agency's new guidance shortening the isolation period for people infected with the coronavirus to 5 days from 10, saying it was, in fact, grounded in science. Speaking During a sometimes contentious telephone briefing with reporters, Walensky also responded to criticism that the messaging from the agency had been muddled and opaque, saying she had appeared in 80 White House briefings since she took office and sometimes taking questions multiple times a week. And, again, the White House briefings are not how people, I think she has to know that the White House briefings are not how most people are going to interact with the CDC. They're going to see on Twitter. They're going to see it really through secondhand sources. They're not like, bookmarking White House appearances when Rochelle Walensky or anybody, including like Jen Psaki, comes on, unless you're like some person who's really obsessed with politics and, the Biden administration. These people are going to see these covered in the news, and the guideline changes, especially in the last few weeks, have just made no sense. And, with the reaction, the poor explanation, and the fact that you change it so quickly in receiving a response to public pressure, just like you change the guidelines, shortening them from 10 to 5, without public pressure. And the 2 negative tests are going to be a problem as well because, you can test positive, depending on what test you take, for weeks and weeks and weeks. Once you get COVID, and now, as we talk about, we're going to talk about, the federal government will not empower or not give people any kind of paid time off for COVID. They're really kind of taking the responsibility onto the employees away from the employers in terms of taking time off from COVID. And with that, and you can't come back with a positive test, and you continue to get a positive test, even though you're not contagious of the 10-day period or the 5-day period or whatever the CDC decides to do, it's going to be very, very hard for you to kind of get back into work in a timely manner, get paid, even if you're feeling fine. Very, very confusing, chaotic situation there. Friday's news conference was conducted again as a Omicron variant continues to drive a dramatic spike in coronavirus cases, and it's both rare and remarkable as the agency's first briefing independent of the White House since former President Donald Trump put an end to them in February of 2020. I hear that you are interested in hearing from the CDC independently, Walensky said, adding that she expected the briefing to be the first of many. A number of reporters seeking the information about the complicated decisions the agency makes repeatedly thanked her, said, yeah, good to do this, which, it's good to see. A highly regarded infectious disease expert with no government experience, she was named to lead the CDC at the start of the Biden administration, who faced many challenges. So let's see. Now the motion of the nation's heading into the third year of the pandemic with a virus that has been constantly throwing curveballs. It's been exhausting. I'm trying to find out any kind of information here that is interesting throughout the rest of it. So Anthony Fauci, the president's top medical advisor for the pandemic, and Vivek Murthy publicly disagreed with the CDC's failure to include a testing recommendation, further confusing the issue. This week, the CDC clarified that if people had access to tests, they could take them. So Walensky encountered intense criticism for a series of messaging missteps, the latest of which involved the new guidance for isolation issued last week. Public health experts criticized his failure to recommend that people infected with the virus test negative before ending the shortened 5-day isolation period. So if you want, I think what they're really meant to say there is, if you get these negative tests in in that 5 to 10 day window, you can end your isolation period. But it's all really a big mess. So, at Friday's briefing, obviously Walensky faced a barrage of sometimes confrontational questions, including confusion of the guidance and her scientific rationale for it. So she says, we do have, she said it would be weeks before scientists have detailed lab data for Omicron, including data on whether people infected with the highly transmissible variant can get infected with it again on the Delta situation. So we have indication that if you had Delta, you're susceptible to infection with Omicron, but there is not yet any data to suggest that Omicron protects against Omicron. So we're going to see how that, because especially with me, I've got Omicron. That's going to be interesting as well. Another story we want to launch is children who have recovered from COVID-19 appear to be at a significantly increased risk of developing type 1 or type 2 diabetes, researchers from the CDC reported on Friday. A heightened risk of diabetes has already been seen among some adults who recovered from COVID, according to some studies. Researchers in Europe who have reported an increase in the number of children being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes since the pandemic started. Type 1 kind of is, the juvenile type of diabetes that kind of comes up, for mostly for kids there. You got to get the insulin therapy and all that stuff, which is, especially in the United States, not a pretty thing for a lot of people. But the CDC's study is among the first to examine large insurance claim databases in the U.S. to estimate the prevalence of new diabetes diagnoses in children under age 18 who have had COVID or known to be infected with the coronavirus. The study used 2 claim databases from U.S. health plans to look at diabetes diagnoses made in youngsters under 18 over the course of a year or more, starting in March 1st, 2020, comparing those who had COVID with those who did not. The researchers found in diabetes increases in both data sets, though the relative rates were kind of quite different. They found a 2.6-fold increase in new diabetes cases in children in one, and a smaller 30% increase in another. So a huge difference, like a 3-fold increase versus 30%, pretty big difference. But even a 30% increase has a big increase in risk, and the differences are likely result from different ways of classifying children as having COVID. As we saw some of the confusion with hospitalizations and stuff. So Sadia, the doctor here, said that 30% is a big increased risk, and it was not yet clear whether post-COVID diabetes would be a chronic condition in children or a transient condition that resolves. Most children will only follow for 4.5 months. So this finding underscores the importance of vaccinating all eligible children against COVID, using measures like masking and distancing, especially to protect the youngest who cannot yet be vaccinated. And it'd be interesting to see if there's any kind of correlation between your intense symptoms when we have it, in terms of that making you more or less likely to have long-term affairs or long-term effects from it. And so increased thirst, frequent urination, unintentional weight loss, and fatigue are among the telltale symptoms. She noted that weight gain and sedentary behavior, which have increased during the pandemic, are also risk factors for diabetes. I'm feeling good though. I'm working out every day. So that is good, especially this week. So I'm staving off that diabetes as I recover from COVID. That is for sure. Maybe the heart, maybe not be in the best shape with the working out of COVID, but obviously listen to your body. Of course. There, and Sadia said her colleagues, many of the children in the study were only diagnosed after having diabetic ketoacidosis, a life-threatening complication which occurs when the body does not have enough insulin to allow blood sugar into cells for use of energy, which is a very, very scary situation. Sadia said that her colleagues did not distinguish between types of diabetes, including type 1 and type 2 in their analysis. The increases were seen both among those who have been ill with COVID and those who are asymptomatic but tested positive. Dang it. All right. All right. Oh, well. Another study also released on Friday by the CDC found that 2 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine protected hospitalized youngsters between 12 through 18 against severe multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which can develop 2 to 6 weeks after infection with the virus. That's another better situation. So, the study looked at 24 hospitals in 20 states between July and December. And during the period when the Delta variant was dominant, it concluded that the vaccine had an efficacy rate of 91% against MIS-C and this kind of a multi-system inflammatory syndrome, and noted that among 38 hospitalized patients aged 12 to 18 who required life support, all were unvaccinated. All right, there you go. That is your COVID news. Coming up next, the workforce is returning, getting back into action. How's that going? We'll fill you in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, happy holidays, and thank you so much for supporting us this year. We are willing to give the gift of audio to you this holiday season, and boy, will it keep coming. We have an action-packed schedule through the 17th of December to the 16th of January, and that all starts with new episodes of Newsflash Now 3 times a week on our old summer schedule of Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. In addition, Hidden History returns with 6 select episodes, 4 on Tuesdays and 2 on select Thursdays, to give you the perfect historical narrative to keep you interested through those times with the family this holiday season. It's been such a great year, and it couldn't have been as good for the Spencer Walsh Radio Network without your support. So, to another year of great audio. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right in and moving with our next story here. As new CDC guidelines and apparent indifference from the White House, scores of workers in the United States are finding themselves with no choice but to go back to work while still suffering from COVID. So let's take a look at this report here from Alex Press in Jacobin. She writes, lately I'm hearing from a lot of people who are frustrated about how working in person with COVID has become the norm at their job, which is a very kind of scary situation. Like, knowing somebody has COVID, thinking about it is nice. I've tried to, having COVID, I've tried to kind of look on the bright side. I'm much less likely to get in the future, got the antibodies, got, more kind of built up immunity from it now that I've had it. But, in terms of, just like we just talked about, I don't want a higher risk of diabetes, so if I would like to at least not be in the same room with people who have COVID. If I can help it and if it makes sense, especially at my job when I'm getting paid and, I don't want to come home with any kind of disease or any kind of, whatever the case may be, if I know someone has it and, still can be contagious, or especially if they're suffering COVID symptoms and are still at work. I think that to me is just absolutely outrageous. But let's see what's actually happening here. The dilemma here seems to be now most visible among educators working in person with COVID, which is not good, because especially with working with children. As Business Insider reported, in New York City, teachers received an email from the Department of Education saying they can in-person teach for 5 days after testing positive for COVID, even if they have symptoms, which is kind of crazy here. So for teachers who test positive, symptoms that won't allow them to return include a minimal cough. That would allow them to return. Would include a minimal cough. Again, you got to decide whether it's a minimal cough or, which some of you can't do, which can't be coughing up phlegm, according to the email. And symptoms have to be mild or improving. Teachers will have to distance themselves if they take off their well-fitting higher-level face covering to eat or drink. They also must continue to stay home outside of work and observe other elements of isolation for 10 days. So this snippet was widely shared on social media, with people rightfully outraged at the nonsensical nature of the directive. Teachers must isolate everywhere except around children, who are, again, obviously least likely to be vaccinated. Some of them, 0 to 4, not, going to be vaccinated at all. The parsing the types of coughs is determining one fitness to work, but this is the reality that so many people are having to make, and a lot of people who want to get back to school as well, and in various contexts all across the country. So the updated CDC guidelines say a person can return to work 5 days after testing positive for COVID, so as long as they don't have symptoms, as well as that those who are vaccinated and boosted do not need to quarantine after COVID exposure. So the result is, I don't think anyone should get, again, quarantine after just being exposed. Once you get a negative test, especially if you're vaccinated and boosted, I think that part makes sense. The result is a shortening of employers' paid leave policies where they exist, and an across-the-board push to get people back to work in the workplace, even their jobs put them in close contact with most vulnerable of populations. I think, some of this stuff is a little bit, I'm maybe a little bit more to the right in terms of restrictions than the most hardcore people. But I personally, I think that second rule is a little bit more expectable. The first rule is just, to me, is really ridiculous. Healthcare workers are in a kind of particular quandary here. National Nurses United condemned the new CDC guidelines, saying weakening COVID-19 guidance now on the face of what could be the most devastating COVID-19 surge yet will only result in further transmissions, illnesses, and death, wrote NNU President Zene Triunfo-Cortez in a letter to the CDC Director Rochelle Walensky. As one healthcare worker tells me, staff and patients are taking turns giving each other COVID at their hospital, with patients catching COVID inside the facility. And again, especially if they're children, then they get marked in as, kind of COVID hospitalizations, and the fear kind of goes up and up and up. And it's very self-destructive cycle, even if they weren't even in for COVID in the first place. And again, I really do have some unanswered questions. I have not been able to find a satisfying answer to, as much as I have looked on that question. Doctors, for their part, are subject to the same pressure return to work, because really there simply isn't enough staff for healthcare facilities to function if those who remain stay home until they're no longer sick. Why is that? Mostly because healthcare workers have to quit in droves after being underpaid and overworked with the pandemic, and especially these private hospitals just will not hire enough people to deal with the job. They're turning in these profits, especially in times like this, and government hospitals, not much better, if at all. Maybe some cases worse due to just underfunding at the state level. I mean, they're not being paid enough for, especially with the work that they've had to put into, and just watching people die in a situation, not having, enough people, and not having the ability to take care, or not having enough people to take care of the people or the patients, and putting this burden of an overwhelming feeling of having 3 patients who are only supposed to have 2 may not sound like much, but if you really only have the resources for 2, what happens to the third one? Especially if they're old or not vaccinated, don't have COVID, they need that, or have COVID, they need that attention, and if you look, they're dead. Or if you don't look, they're dead, and that can happen, can continue, can build up until it's a really, really tough situation. Yeah, so those permanent workers who remain doubled and tripled up, no longer able to provide the patients care as needed. As one ICU nurse who recently quit his job put it, I was actively helping kill people, he said. This was his take on it, but I think it was a very kind of an interesting situation. And it's the guy who did it, he was on the I think his name is Andrew. I don't know his Twitter, but he posted a video. I know that's not going to help anybody find him, but it is talking about that, who actively helping kill people. For all the talk about it contain the virus, without higher wages, stimulus checks, or guaranteed paid sick leave forthcoming, the implicit strategy is universal COVID exposure, including among those particularly vulnerable populations. Just get it out of there, which is incredibly dangerous and incredibly misguided. All right. Let's move on now to our next story. We're in Atlanta. This is in the New York Times here. A Georgia judge on Friday sentenced both Travis McMichael, the man who shot Ahmad Arbrey, and his father to life in prison with the possibility of parole, but issued a lesser sentence of life with the possibility of parole to the other man convicted of murdering Arbrey, a 25-year-old black man who they had chased through the neighborhood. The 3 men, McMichael, 35, and his father, Gregory, Travis McMichael and Gregory, and their neighbor William Bryan were convicted of murder and other counts in the state court in November, resulting in mandatory life sentences. And the main question before Judge Timothy Walmsley on Friday was whether Mr. Arbery's murderers should be eligible for parole after 30 years, the earliest possible opportunity for such offenders under Georgia law. So again, it's very good to it's very, very good to see this happening. And I think, again, really, because, this was already kind of known at this point, the mandatory life sentences would be coming down. But the question is, really was regard to their parole. And it really does show you how things have changed. And again, the standard that, but really, even when it comes to standard on this, the crime here was it was on video, it was apparent. But in a post-George Floyd, post-Black Lives Matter world, I think this crime is prosecuted, the perpetrators are brought to much more sound justice, shall we say, and I think that is a very good thing.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh.
It's Newsflash.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Newsflash 590. It's absolutely incredible. Let's get now to our last story by Chip Gibbons here in Jacobin. Yesterday marked 1 year since pro-Trump fanatics stormed the U.S. Capitol under the belief that they could halt the counting of electoral votes and install the loser of an election as president. Democrats marked the occasion remembering the breaching of the Capitol as an attack on democracy, featuring a bizarre musical interlude from the cast of Hamilton, which cannot be more like upper class, white, liberal, nevertheless she resisted, pussy hat wearing, kind of catered to that audience if it tried. It cannot be more of a parody of that, descending, who do we call when democracy is under attack? Lin-Manuel Miranda and the original cast of Hamilton. Like, cannot be more on the nose right there. Republicans were less eager to do so. During the official congressional ceremony, only 2 Republicans chose to attend. One was Liz Cheney, currently a U.S. representative for Wyoming, and one was her father, Dick Cheney, as a former member of Congress. Cheney has lifetime congressional floor privileges. That's kind of what you get. Numerous Democrats reportedly walked over to Cheney to shake his hand. This is, it's really kind of disgusting and gross. Just to see this happen, and it's almost, I think the left gets in a position of like every 6 months reminding people that this is just like not an okay or an acceptable thing to do, and it's just really, really bad. Whatever happens, I find it difficult to put into words how shameful venerating Cheney like this is by anyone, much less the country's supposed left-wing party, and it's particularly jarring that Cheney has dedicated his career to attacking democracy, given that Cheney has dedicated his career to attacking democracy, the very thing the ceremony was supposedly in opposition to. It's necessary to remember a bit of history here. Cheney was the most powerful vice president in U.S. history, that's for sure. He is most remembered for his role in promoting the Iraq War, an illegal war of aggression predicated on lies, as well as pushing the nation to the dark side after 9/11, which included torture, detention without trial, including U.S. citizens, warrantless surveillance, and other egregious departures from the liberal norms of democracy. I mean, this guy was like literally the person who invented or took out the Constitution more than anybody. Kind of in the Bush administration, he had his associates around him and various people. It's not like Bush was, completely unwilling and a great person, not by any stretch of the imagination. He was right there behind him, emphasis on the behind part, in terms of just taking out the Constitution, tearing it up, throwing it in the paper shredder, and, any kind of, especially this parts about civil liberties, the part about, there's like the Second Amendment, what I'm trying to think, what other parts of the Constitution that they abide by? Very little. But in terms of the actual civil liberties, separation of powers, giving, it was not the best at all. Habeas corpus, all those types of things. All this was predicated on a shocking legal theory that gave the president sweeping wartime powers that neither Congress nor the courts could check. As they were fighting a global war with no borders, this meant that not even the U.S. citizens in the United States were safe from the president's wartime rampages. This was the case of Jose Padilla, who was arrested famously at the Chicago airport and declared an enemy combatant by George W. Bush and held in a military prison for 3.5 years. Again, not actions of a defender of democracy, not to mention all the crimes that Dick Cheney committed in the pre-W administration and, all the stuff other than the Iraq War. In 9/11 and all the kind of civil rights abuses that took place, he hasn't even brought up the word Iraq War, and I'm just kind of saying that automatically. He has. So Cheney first began his career in the disgraced presidency of Richard Nixon, staying on to the jailed Ford administration. While Nixon's name is synonymous with the abuses of power of an imperial presidency, see Hidden History for a little fun story about how that worked out. Especially episode 4, most recent episode. While Nixon's name is synonymous with the abuses of power of the imperial presidency, Cheney believed Nixon had gotten a raw deal. Most importantly, he believed the power of the presidency had been too greatly diminished. He resented congressional attempts to put restrictions on intelligence agencies, rein in the president's ability to wage war without congressional consent, and make the executive branch more transparent. Cheney's zeal for executive and contempt for the legislature was continued during his time in Congress, when he was not opposing freedom for Nelson Mandela or voting against sanctions on apartheid South Africa. He was using his spot on the Congressional Committee investigating Iran-Contra to advance his theories of expansive presidential war-making, and Cheney spearheaded the Minority Report, in fact, for that investigation. At the time, Democrats rightly described Iran-Contra as a constitutional crisis, an attack on rule of law and the democracy itself. Yet to Cheney, the abuse of power came not from the executive branch, but for the legislative branch, which had usurped the powers of the president. And it could really kind of you can go into the whole history of the Iran-Contra scandal, but, the point is, Dick Cheney is a bad guy, and, wondering why the Democrats are embracing him, shows you just, like, they have no, if you can embrace Dick Cheney, you will embrace anybody. Like, there's no level, there's no, spine, there's no line, I guess, there's no kind of, outer border to the tent, at least on the rightward side. Like, it'll always, the flimsy moral standards will not really, in any kind of way, just kind of embrace, I disagree with him on some things. No, that kind of talk should be reserved for, like a much, much, much more moderate Republican of, a bygone era that probably just does not exist, and definitely does not exist in today's legislature. And, when it comes to today's legislature, comparing them to Dick Cheney, like, I would take Marjorie Taylor Greene, all those people, all those crazies, Matt Gaetz, Matt Gaetz, as disgusting and as craven as they are, they're also stupid and not nearly as, they're just from a different era of Republican. Dick Cheney was maybe, the first generation of Rube. Like, these are 2 or 3 generations of just, like, born and bred, like, idiots who are, raised on, like, 3 generations of, like, pure grown, pasteurized conservative bullshit. And that, that really just stops them from seeing the world clearly, which is something that Dick Cheney definitely did do. And he saw a world that, by all accounts is pretty hellish. And that is something that, as a Democratic Party, you do, like, the party, a party is a party when it has firm, walls about what it can accept and what it can't accept. And if you can, for a moment, give that guy any shred of respect, I don't get why anyone should, see the Democrats as a party, with firm moral boundaries, because they just clearly do not exist. All right, that's all we got for you guys. We will see you on Monday.